Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adventures in History. And I hope that you're doing well, and I hope that you're having a good day, night, afternoon, early morning, whatever it is that you're having. Hope that you're enjoying it. It's been an interesting day for me. I got some stuff done, I guess. A little bit busier than I wanted it to be. I'm Spartacus. Who's actually Spartacus? What's up, Tuna? Good to see you, man. Hey, Cliff. How's it going? Sorry about that. That was way too loud. Yeah. I'm on break, so my brain is a bit scattered, and it's not necessarily moving in point A to point B sort of fashion, kind of all over the place. I did more work today than I sort of wanted to, but that's okay. I needed some stronger tea. Yeah, I actually went by tea and just decided to go straight for coffee. Yeah, I saw Berbers. That was fun. I don't know if I'm completely back to processing from the trip to Texas. It was fun. I had a good time. And we succeeded in what we were after and saw a lot of stuff that was really, really cool. And had a really good time doing that. I think I'm literally just talking in circles right now. I slept so much yesterday. It wasn't even funny. Like I slept late, and then I took like almost a 4-hour nap yesterday afternoon, and then I slept all night last night, and I'm still kind of tired. I'm still fighting off the remnants of the sinus junk that I've been going through for like almost the last month. It's been doing this, like shows up and falls away and shows up and falls away for a while now, and it's really, really annoying. So, never heard of the Berbers before. Interesting, Viper. Well, we'll talk about them extensively tonight. So, The Burbs is a fun movie. It's a pretty fun movie. Largely inaccurate to the average experience, but you know, it's not designed to be accurate. It's designed to be entertaining, right? Okay, yeah. So this is viewer request night. This viewer request came in from streamer or stream chatter Cliff Alistair McLean, who's here in chat tonight. As a request, we will be picking our next viewer request via vote at the end of the stream tonight. And we're not going to spend too much on the prologue because there are a lot of things to talk about tonight. Just in sort of general, and this isn't anything bad, talking about an entire group of people in one stream is a bit of a challenge because it's like, hey, what do you talk about? Like how much do you cover? What do you pick? What do you leave out? And with a people group that's got probably like 12, 13,000 years of history, how do you condense that into one stream? So it's a bit hard to pick which topics to cover. It's fair to note that a lot of the stuff that we will cover tonight could be viewer requests in its own right, especially towards the second half of the stream where we get into some of the notable kingdoms that were ruled by Berber people. You could do a stream probably on each one of them individually, and I've been sort of tasked with trying to figure out a way to condense all of that into one thing. So it's going to be really fast on a lot of the topics tonight, and that's not because it's not cool to talk about. It's just an abundance of material, so we'll be moving through. Sorry, can you say that again? We're going to talk about a lot of stuff very quickly, and it's not because we are trying to give them a short shrift, it's because there's just an abundance of material. Also, hey, DCI Banks, good to see you. What stuff really quick? Everything tonight, but specifically the second half when we're talking about Berber kingdoms. Yeah, Tuna, I fully expect the tangents to arrive, and that's perfectly fine as well. That's sort of what we do here. So, with no further preamble, I'd say let's just sort of let's just go right at it. So first off, who are the Berber people? Well, there's a lot of Berber peoples, and they're sort of spread out all over the place, mostly here in northern Africa. And someone's already looking up Wikipedia pages so that they can do puns. It doesn't actually pronounce like amazing at all. It's more like amazig. The A's in Arabic act quite differently than A's in English do. And the first one is almost like a U sound. And the second one is like a little bit of a U sound as well. So it's amazig instead of amazigs. But I could see how, it's visually similar. English is a silly language. Anyway, the colored areas here are going to represent where Berber people are currently distributed in the world. And we're looking mostly here at, again, northern Africa. And the different colors are going to represent different tribes of people. This is something that we're going to talk about quite a bit later on. But we're looking here, places like Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, a little bit over into Egypt, and then down into places like Nigeria, Chad, a little bit into Mauritania, a little bit into Burkina Faso. But you can see here the modern distribution. Now, that is not the same as the ancient distribution. So what are we even doing when we say Berber? What do we mean when we say that? Where do we get this word from? Well, originally this is going to come from Greek. Our word Berber is translated through Greek, and it comes from the same pejorative term that barbarian came from. The whole, your language sounds really bad to our ears, so we're going to call you Berbers, just like barbars for barbarians. Same root, same source. And this particular assignation is going to be picked up later on by Arabic people. Arabic people are going to have a pretty big distinction between themselves and the Berbers, mostly due to cultural history, but especially due to linguistic history. And we'll talk a little bit more about linguistic stuff in just a bit. But Arabic is more of a Semitic language, and Berber is not. It's an Afro-Asiatic language from prior to the split between the two groups. But we'll talk about that in just a bit. But what does that mean about who these people were in antiquity? Well, even in antiquity, we go all the way back to when we first hear reference of these people. They are not a unified group. And this is something that is very frequently overlooked in our modern world when we refer to Berber people instead of peoples. There is not a unified Berber existence in the modern world or in the ancient world. If you go back to the ancient world, you see people referring to tribes that are Berbers, and there are several different of these tribes. Sometimes there are 3. Sometimes there are as many as 7. Sometimes you see splits between the 2 of them. Big families come and go, etc., etc. But the identity of Berber is not one that is necessarily a unified copy-paste existence. So you can be Berber in Morocco and be very different than Berber, say, in Algeria, or Berber in Egypt, or Berber in Burkina Faso. they're going to be a disparate group, and they have a genetic history and they have a linguistic history that does overlap, but it's pretty far back in time, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, there have been some efforts in the modern world to try to move away from the use of the word Berber, because it is, again, it's based in a pejorative term, and a lot of the modern governments of the world use Berber as a sort of a distinction of discrimination. So there have been some groups that are trying to adopt a more individualized term in their own language. This is where you get the term that Viper shared here just a second ago, which is Amazigh, instead of Berber. And I do want to acknowledge that this is something that some of the people that we would call Berbers today are pushing for this, but it is not something that is accepted universally among all people that are Berbers. This is something that is very popular, especially among some Algerian groups who have managed to hold together a lot of their sort of indigenous lifestyle in the face of various external powers trying to wipe them out. And it's not something that everybody really latches onto. Hey, Lumpy, and hey, a cave. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is you can't use the word Berber and use it to mean everybody that exists within this sort of broader linguistic and genetic classification. It's not a good term that describes the differences between these people groups, and in many instances, both historical and modern, the term Berber gets used pejoratively and gets used specifically to sort of stereotype people into an easily discriminated group. So why then do we still use Berber? Well, because some of the people that classify as Berber still classify themselves as Berber and actually are pushing for some sort of attempt towards a Berberization or a unification of Berber identities in light of political pressure, cultural pressure, etc. So if you meet someone that speaks some of these languages or that would have this history, it would be a good idea to ask those people or that person how they would describe themselves, and then go with what they suggest. Because you're going to find some people that are going to very proudly say, yes, I'm a Berber and that's my history. Other people are going to say, I don't want you to call me Berber. I want you to call me Amazigh and be more comfortable with that. But some of them might want to be referred to by their individual tribal names. So don't just assume that whomever you meet that speaks one of these languages is going to be comfortable being referred to as a Berber, right? So just, I say all of that because I want to be very clear. It's not an easy term to even tackle in usage. So, heads up. Berberi, as opposed to Barbary, like the Barbary pirates. We're actually not going to talk about them tonight. So, where did these people show up from? Where are their origins? How did they come to be to begin with? Well, we have evidence of peoples living in this area for a really, really, really long time. Northern Africa in general, which you can see sort of down here on the map, has historically been a really big migration route. And we see lots of different hominid species moving through this area. Homo sapiens have been there for probably... I don't know if I could say hundreds of thousands of years, but at least 100,000 years. Obviously, not every hominin that walked through goes on to be a Berber, we start seeing individual recognizable traits, both genetically and culturally, that show up as far back as about 10,000 BC. Specifically, we start getting cave paintings. These are typically going to be in the northern Sahara region. And it's fair to note as well that 10,000 BC northern Africa does not look the same as modern northern Africa. At that point, a lot of the area that is today desert would have been a savanna, where things like pastoralized cows would have been a much easier thing to handle. Most of the first people groups that were going to be sort of in the lineage of the Berbers are going to be pastoralists. We start seeing evidence of semi-nomadism as far back as about 6,000 BC. So these people are in the area, they're moving around a little bit, they're going to start settling down, they're going to establish themselves sort of a territory. They look like longhorns. I don't actually know what species of cow those would be, but they would have been domesticated, which by itself is, again, a sign of increasing levels of civilization, etc. We're going to notice that these people groups are going to show up frequently in older historical records. We're going to see a lot of evidence for these nomadic people that would go on to be later identified as Berbers, dealing with groups like the Egyptians, as far back as the early Old Kingdom. There's a bit of a debate about whether or not the Egyptian depiction of a Libyan would be a person that was of Berber ancestry. And it's really hard to say that far back. Obviously, people don't have, any sort of genetic ability to identify people groups through DNA. But there's a sort of stereotypical depiction of a person that the Egyptians considered living in this area. And sometimes you'll see them referred to as Libyans, other times referred to as Saites. Were these the Berber people? I don't know. Some people are very convinced that they are Berbers. I don't know if they are, and I don't think it's necessarily safe to say that we know for sure that these people were. But a lot of people want to look at stereotypical depictions in Egyptian imagery and say this is what a Berber would have looked like. I don't know if we can do that. I think that's a bit of a reach. But, who am I? I'm just a guy on Twitch, right? So we do know that they were around in the early Bronze Age. We know that they survived the collapse of the Bronze Age because by the time the Phoenicians are expanding out along the northern African coast, making their colonies, that they're going to have contacts with the Berber people. A guy on Twitch that knows more than most humans. Well, I mean, that is a little bit of a low bar, though. If you look at most humans don't have the level of education that I have. Just as a basis, most humans includes a lot of really, really smart people that haven't had access to education. A lot of these people in Northern Africa are just as capable of being intelligent as I am. They just haven't had access to education. JMR Killer, are you subscribing from Japan? JMR, thank you so much for that subscription. That's an impressive subscription from Japan. I hope that your trip is going really, really well, man. I am very jealous of the photos and the experience. So they do have internet there, but the question wasn't could he do this from Japan. The question was more because he is in Japan on vacation, why would he want to spend his time watching me on Twitch? Right? It was more of a self-deprecating question. You're in Osaka waiting for Kumamoto. Oh, cool. There we go. Um, Osaka's a really cool place, man. I hope that you had a great time there. By the way, JMR is vacationing in Japan and has been sending me amazing photographs and making me very jealous. But that's okay. I'm glad that he's having that experience. It's great. But thank you for the subscription. Well, you know, all good things, right? All good things come to an end. I don't know. You might be ready to come back. You might be really tired, jet lag and all. But anyway, where was I? Who am I? Yeah. Anyway, so we see the Phoenicians interacting with Berber peoples as they are colonizing northern Africa. We know that they're going to strike up quite a bit of good relationships with a lot of these people. The trade between the native Berber peoples in northern Africa and the Phoenicians is going to increase quite a bit. And in some of these cities, like the big city of Carthage, you're going to see a lot of friendship that begins to develop. And we're also going to see references to these people in Median and Persian historical records, obviously in Greek records. By the time we get to what we might call classical antiquity, that good period of time, like Alexander the Great-ish, the Berbers are going to have established kingdoms in this area. And what's notable here, and this sort of goes along the lines of helping us understand the Berber people today, even in antiquity, as far back as we have reference, not all of the Berber people are going to be unified. We see the political differences that are going to be at play. We see some of our really big trade empires and power-based empires playing politics between the different tribes of Berbers and playing them off of each other. And we're also going to get reference that their languages are different. And I think this is a good point for us to talk specifically about their language, because by this time they had developed quite an extensive vocabulary, different usages, different all kinds of stuff, including stuff like this, which is it's the modern version of their alphabet. This particular alphabet is a modern version of a alphabet that's called Tifinagh, and I think it's really fascinating looking. You can see that there's a little bit of influence from external sources. Some of these letters look a little bit like they maybe had some early Phoenician influence. Especially stuff like your delta here. This might look very similar. Not a universal one-to-one kind of across the board thing, but so this Jamar, these people are from northern Africa. You're having the best Xmas vacation of your life so far, Lumpy. That's amazing. That's great. Your DNA test says you're 5% Northern African, so needless to say, you're an authority on this subject. What's up, Cryonics? Well, that gives you 5% more authority than I have. So, you can rest comfortable in your 5% heritage. What's up, Matt? Good to see you. Welcome in. That looks like the key to solve a D&D puzzle. Sort of. You can get a lot of runic influence out of a lot of that stuff. Clearly based on the Dwarven alphabet. So Barbary pirates are going to be the much later descendants of these people that we're talking about. Absolutely. Good connection there. My DNA says that I'm Irish. Yes, but Irish by way of other places, right? I've heard of a founding myth that traces the Berbers back to Goliath / the biblical Philistines / Sea people. Is that pure fiction? Yes. There would have been Berber people in northern Africa way, way before the the people group that were the Philistines. The connection there likely deals with the fact that the Philistines were a sea-based trading people that had contact with the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians did a lot of trading with that area. So there are going to probably be people moving from around the Philistia region, which is modern day places like Lebanon and the coast of southern Israel, to places like northern Africa. But yeah, the Berber people were around before that. We have evidence of them even being, pretty well established with semi-nomadism at that point. About, well, the Goliath would have been what? Iron Age, 600s BC, about 5,400 years before that, we have pretty clear evidence that the Berbers were already there. And if we want to attribute all of the cave painting stuff to the Berber people from that area, that would push it back to like 10,000 BC. There are always going to be people that want to try to connect stuff to, especially the Bible. But in this case, I don't think that there's a lot of merit to that particular idea. My NDA says that I'm dyslexic. I haven't signed an NDA for this particular stream, so. Anyway, by this time period, we're starting to see stuff like this, which is a combination cave painting and some cool writing on it. You start seeing big inscriptions like this. This is an inscription that describes this particular king named Ataban, and cool stuff that he did. So this is a wolf or a lion. It's a scary looking thing with a messed up face. So there we go. So we start seeing like evidence of organized, centralized government sort of material. Linguistically, though, that's what we're talking about. Their particular language group is referred to as Afroasiatic. But that can be a little bit misleading, because there are a lot of languages that have African and Asian roots. So specifically here, their language is going to trace back to around 10,000 BC and be present in this sort of region, kind of what we're looking at down here on the map, and kind of this broader region right around in here. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that when the Arabic people showed up, they noticed that the Berbers spoke a very, very different language. But Arabic is a Semitic language, which is sort of lumped in a lot with these Afroasiatic languages. So why the difference? Well, it's because the Berber language pretty clearly split off and moved this direction somewhere back around as far as 4000 BC. It's a little bit hard to trace a lot of this stuff linguistically, because you have to do a lot of kind of guesswork. How much does a language change over time? How much uniqueness can we expect from a language given this much time apart from this stuff? How far does language drift? And you can get some basic ideology, but it's not always going to be very easy. But this is also another example that sort of might go back to Cliff's question from earlier. If the Berbers were originally Philistines, they would have been speaking a Semitic language, because the Philistines spoke a Semitic language. They would have carried that with them to northern Africa, but the language group that the Berbers spoke separated from the languages that would have gone on to be Semitic 4,000 years BC. So there's a lot of difference there. I guess I should have probably come to that first, but then I didn't. But the Berber languages themselves aren't all going to be mutually intelligible. This means that if you speak one Berber language, there's no guarantee that you're definitely going to be able to understand all of the other Berber languages. Some of them are mutually unintelligible, which means that they aren't understandable at all between the two groups. So, what then ties them together? Well, you have structure of the language, specifically stuff like where the verb is, where the object is, where the subject is, that kind of stuff. And you have pronunciation of letters, and you have these alphabets that are used in most of the particular languages. The original old school version of their alphabet is referred to as Libico-Berber, which is what you might see in the super ancient inscriptions like I just showed you. So linguistically, pretty interesting group. And again, this language group is still spoken by Berber people today. And if you go to different parts of the world today where you find Berber people, they might not speak a language that's intelligible to any other Berber person. So this, again, is another one of the problems with sort of the idea that some of the Berbers want to have this sort of pan-Berber identity. A lot of that is linguistic based, that is hampered by the fact that their languages don't necessarily overlap as well as a lot of people sort of expect them to do. Right? Like, oh, if you're Berber, you speak Berber language, everybody can speak this stuff, but it's not really the same. But that's not necessarily something to be surprised about. A lot of these languages don't completely overlap, right? I mean, just look at the Romance languages. If we look at, English and Romanian, you're not going to necessarily be intelligible to each other. There are going to be a few places where your language overlaps, and you're going to be able to say some words that overlap, but you're not going to understand each other. But we have similar linguistic roots, right? I could say mean things about French. If Mac in a lab coat were in the chat, he would probably say mean things about French. He's not a big fan of the French language for various reasons. So what then do we do? So where do we go from here? We've talked about who they are. We talked about where they live. They talked about when they lived, and we talked about what they speak. And this is where it gets kind of tough. Like, what do you do with the stream now? Like, we've given this sort of background and this idea of who these people are. Well, what do we do now? Tracing the history of every single Berber group through time is obviously not something that's going to be easily done, or perhaps even capable of being done at all. So what I have elected to do is sort of hit some high points of ancient Berber kingdoms that are going to be ones that are worthy of study by themselves. So again, we could probably do an entire stream on just about any of these people. So let's start with ancient kingdom of Mauritania. If we look at the map here, this is where they're currently located, or historically located. Sort of part of what is modern day Morocco, a little bit of Algeria. Mauritania is not the name that they would have called themselves. Obviously, this is a language. Is that how they spelled it? I believe so. I could check. It's okay. So I think what you might be running into, Cryonics, is that the modern country is not spelled that way. The modern country of Mauritania isn't. It doesn't actually even share any of the territory that the ancient Mauritanians would have ruled, and it is spelled differently. But this is the ancient spelling. So it's fair to call me out, and it was good for me to check because I wasn't 100% sure. But yeah, this is how the ancient people would have spelled it, or the Latin people would have spelled it. So obviously, here in the northern part of Africa. What do we know about them? Well, they were tribal for a long time in this area. We have reference from the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians dealing with them in tribal form. We know that they had established some regional kingdoms by the 3rd century BC, that is. So that's like the 300s to the 200s BC. And we know that they were tangentially involved in the big wars between Rome and Carthage. These are the Punic Wars. By the time we get to the late 2nd century or early 1st century, they had unified, like all of the individual little Mauritanian kingdoms had unified into one larger kingdom that had for a little while been a client kingdom of Rome. And then they are going to end up being merged with another group called the Numidians right at the end of their existence, and then they're going to be completely swallowed up by Rome in the 1st century or so. So this is something that is going to be kind of a recurring theme, unfortunately, for a lot of the Berber people. The area is not necessarily densely populated. Some of the cities are very, very, very large, but a lot of the territory itself is not densely populated. A lot of it is very sparsely populated, especially when you get up into the mountains. And it's going to be fairly easy for external forces to show up with very large armies and conquer the cities, and then force the populations in this disparate area to follow external rule. That doesn't mean that the people in this region are particularly kind with the external people groups. And in fact, in many instances, the native Berber people are going to be very resilient when it comes to resisting external rule. And it's going to be very common for people, especially in the mountainous regions that are sort of off of the coastal, what we might call the coastal plain, to be very, very, very fervently anti-outsider. But that doesn't mean they're going to be able to muster the numbers needed to push the outsiders away. And unfortunately for the Berber people, most of the time for the rest of our history, they're going to be at various degrees of dealing with a larger external power, which is obviously going to suck for them. So moving a little bit to the east rather, we can see Numidia, which is here. The Numidians were a different group of Berber people than the Mauritanians, and they're going to sometimes be at odds with the Mauritanians, and other times they're going to be allied with them. The Numidians are going to especially be friendly with Carthage. So this region right here, which is a large part of modern-day Tunisia, is where the sort of the heartland of the Carthaginian Empire would have been. And we know for a fact that the Numidians were very closely allied with the Carthaginians for quite some time. This area had been under semi-nomadic pastoralism for a very, very long period of time, and they were especially good at raising horses. And this is going to be sort of the core of the ancient Numidian identity, that they're going to be really good at horseback hunting and horseback fighting. Their cavalry in war is going to be sought after. The Carthaginians are going to pay them very, very handsomely to fight on their side. And the Romans' ability to convince the Numidians to sort of betray the Carthaginians is going to be one of the turning points in the conflict between Rome and Carthage. When the Numidians flip to the Roman side, this is a death knell for the Carthaginians. The Numidians are going to be ruled very powerfully by their own leaders. One of the big ones is a guy named Massinissa, who was a very powerful king for quite some time. But as Rome sort of waxes in power, Numidia is going to be slowly but surely put on the sidelines. A lot of the trouble that happens in northern Africa is going to be between different Berber tribes that were trying to sort of jockey for leadership. Rome is eventually going to get tired of them and move down in the 100s and swallow all of this area up. For a little while, Numidia and Mauritania were going to sort of be merged into a kind of joint kingdom, and we do see some of their stuff left behind, stuff like this. This is a big mausoleum of a king named Duga, and it's pretty cool. If we look here, we can see these pretty great little friezes of people in chariots being pulled by horses. Of course, this is going to be a callback to the fact that these are very powerful horseback fighters. And then you see also stuff like this. This is the mausoleum of a king that ruled both Mauritania and Numidia together. This guy's name is Juba II, who actually oversaw a little bit of a revival period for the Berber kingdom just before its end. Managed to intermarry with the Ptolemy dynasty over in Egypt to prop himself up as a little bit of an independent ruler against Roman expansion, but ultimately is not going to be able to hold out. Rome, of course, swallows up pretty much the world. And that's just kind of what Rome does, right? So Rome is going to hold on to this area for a rather long time. The whole of northern Africa is going to be conquered more or less by about 150 or so AD, and then Rome is going to hold on to northern Africa for a majority of the next 300 years. Now, it's also fair to point out that while Rome was kind of falling apart in the European front, northern Africa was still really their jam for a long time. That is until the Vandals showed up. The Vandals were a particularly powerful group of barbarians that crossed into northern Africa. And the Vandals are going to have a lot of direct dealings and violent dealings with the local Berber people. A lot of the Berbers during that period of time had Christianized under the rule of Rome. And the Vandals were a heretical version of Christianity called Arianism. And Arians did not really care for the way that the Orthodox Catholics would have done things, and this is going to lead to some interesting developments, especially dealing with our Berber people here, and the development of several small kingdoms. The coolest one, in my opinion, and this is, again, me just sort of being a little bit biased here, the kingdom of Auras, which is not so big over here in what is today Algeria, a little bit into Tunisia. Fairly small kingdom, but pretty neat because it's going to be instrumental, because it is a Christian Berber kingdom that is trying to fight back against the Vandalic people. The Vandals are going to be pretty tough. They're going to take over most of northern Africa, except for our little kingdom here, and a couple of other places that are further off the coast as well. And Aris is going to hold out. Aristotle, what's up, Matt? How you doing? Dun dun dun. Head hurts. Dun 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 dun. Thank you for the follow. And welcome to the adventure. Hope your head is feeling better. Tylenol? Welcome in, my friend. Hope you're doing well. Please feel free to ask questions. We're going to hang out, talk about the Berbers, do our thing, chat a little bit. You can see the stuff that pops up in chat. We're pretty cool, laid back. Or at least I think so, anyway. So our kingdom here is going to hold out all the way through until the 700s, and by the time we get to the 700s, we are going to see a new group of people show up in northern Africa that are going to change the trajectory of the region pretty significantly. Of course, those are going to be the Arabs, and they're going to be bringing with them Islam. The last queen here of Eris is going to be a lady named Dia, who is very frequently sort of seen as a local kind of cult hero. She was a Christian Berber queen that fought really, really hard to maintain her country's independence against the advancing Arab Muslims. And in doing so, is going to put up a very, very staunch fight for a country as small as it was. They were ultimately doomed. They managed to land a few blows against the Muslim armies that were very unexpected, but if we're just being for real here, it was just sort of a matter of time. But what's interesting is I could show you this big structure here. This is a amphitheater that is in modern day Tunisia at a place called El Jem. And obviously here a Roman era amphitheater, and a huge one at that. But Dia decided to turn this into sort of her base of operations and fortified the amphitheater and moved supplies and stuff like that in, and really sort of went down swinging. And I like to show this particular picture here because a lot of people, when they think, they think Roman ruins, they think about going to Italy, or they want to go to France or Spain or places like that. And obviously those places do have really, really cool Roman ruins. But you can also go to Tunisia, right? And see really cool things like this, which I would love to go see. Absolutely huge amphitheater here. But anyway, they're going to hang around until about 7:03, and Dia today is still kind of a local folk hero that represents the Berber people resisting the kind of inevitable larger force that's big and scary and potentially going to destroy them. Is this near the modern city of Sifax? I think I saw that as a child. Maybe. I know that the modern city is just El Jem. We can zoom in on it on the old Google Earth. So let's see. Let me put up my borders and labels. Yeah, so this city is just El Jem. We can see what's around it. I'm not seeing that city around it, but that doesn't mean that it's not. It could be a smaller settlement that's not going to pop up unless we zoom in really far. But anyway, hey, nom nom nom. Hey, thanks so much. I don't know why my my bits nomination, or not my bits nomination, my little bits alert isn't going off. But nom nom nom, thank you so much. Hope you're having a good one. I know what we can do while we're here. Let's do this guy. We'll just go to full screen. Big city to the south. You can see that my Tunisian geography is not necessarily the best. Headhurt says, were there any distinguishing factors for the army? Yeah, so they were really big. Well, yes and no. So the Berbers themselves were not a unified group. So not all of them fought the same way. I don't know if you were with us when we were just talking about the Numidians. But the Numidians were especially good at cavalry fighting. A lot of the Berbers were quite good at archery, and a lot of them were attached to different military units as like Roman military units as auxilia. These are people that are used for specific purposes, like javelin throwers or projectile fighters. But not every Berber group is sort of created exactly the same. Not every Berber group was going to be super big on cavalry. Not every Berber group was going to have the world's best archers, etc. A lot of them, though, were horseback. A lot of them were projectile fighters. So, again, this is El Jim. We're just sort of looking around the site now because I remember that we could zoom in and walk around on it. Google Earth is amazing, by the way. This is the program that we're using, Google Earth, right now, and it's completely free. Anybody can use this if you want to. How many people were they around that time? So, again, this is a hard question to answer. Do we mean how many people were Berbers in general? Do we mean how many people were Berbers in this region? The population of the world at that time was way lower than what it is right now. Obviously, hundreds of millions. It's hard for me to guess because I don't actually know the demographics. I would say that if you were to take a big city like El Jim that had obviously a population big enough to support an amphitheater that big, it's probably going to have several 100,000 people in it. But the region around that would probably not have the same density as somewhere like northern Italy, right? The population density of that region would have probably been about the same as somewhere like maybe some of these eastern provinces in Turkey, right? Something that would have been more open for pastoral people that were going to herd instead of plant. A lot of the big, like, sedentary agriculture, growing crop stuff was going on around this region over here. By the time you get anywhere past sort of this big break, you kind of see the geographic break right here. The green areas would have been further up, right? Like this would have been good savanna, good for growing crops. You could see here like sort of this continental shield right here, these big mountains. All of this would have been green. All of this. So it would have been more populated than it is now, but like I would have to look for very specific types of papers to determine that, and it's hard to estimate population sizes just off the top of your head. You'd have to look at stuff like the number of coins being found in that area. You would have to look at the number of shipwrecks off the coast. There's a lot of stuff that goes into ancient population stuff, and I would love to be able to tell you, like, 5,000 people or 10,000 people, but it's hard to say, and I don't really like guessing because I don't know if I can guess very well. KP's going to drop the lurk. Thanks, man. Much opinion. I got a random opinion hat. All right, let's see what we got. All right, the opinion hat has been summoned. Do some opinion hat emotes in the chat. The Sphinx of Giza was a tourist attraction for the Romans. However, more thorough excavation didn't occur until the 19th century by the Europeans. What did the locals think of the Sphinx? Why did they attempt to excavate it before the 19th century? I don't know. My opinion, the Muslim people that were running the place during the Islam took that place over in the 600s, and generally speaking, Islam doesn't give a crap about your paganism and didn't really care about your paganism and didn't want it around in the first place. So leave it under the dirt because we don't care. The reason it got dug up in the 1900s is because rich white people had enough free time to go, hey, I wonder what's under there. And they decided to go pay people to dig it up. But the average Muslim doesn't want to spend a lot of time in the ancient world digging up pagan stuff that's going to have a whole bunch of, obviously false teachings. And like the Sphinx by itself is just a big image, and it's not really something that they probably cared very much about, just to be for real. This is one of the reasons why Cairo is the capital of Egypt today instead of somewhere like Memphis or Alexandria, because like even the ancient Muslims didn't want to stay in the cities with all of those other people, right? It's very common for Muslim armies to set up a new camp that's distant from the big cities, because the cities are places of sin and debauchery, and like this is why Baghdad exists, right? Baghdad is just up the river from the old ancient city of Ctesiphon, which had been a capital for, by the time that they took it over, almost 1,000 years. They don't want anything to do with that, though. That's where all those weird Zoroastrians are, and that's where all those Christians are with their churches, and we don't want anything to do with that. We want our people to be able to stay outside of that, where we can control what they're getting involved with. Then we're just going to let all that stuff go. Like the amount of ancient Ctesiphon that still exists is minuscule compared to how big it used to be, because they don't care. And a modern example of that I could show as a sort of case in point is when ISIS took over Palmyra, ancient city of Palmyra, UNESCO World Heritage Site. ISIS took it over and started blowing stuff up. Started shooting things with mortars. Started blowing things up with grenades, because they don't care about this Palmyrene ancient city full of images and evil. So just in general, I just don't think that they care. It just wasn't their world. So that's just my opinion. Yeah, like Taliban blowing up Buddha statues. It's the same thing, right? Like they just... Yeah, absolutely. I never have a problem giving my opinion on stuff. Is the air drier now? Yes. Now, the Sahara is much larger now than it used to be in the ancient world. Yeah, it is sad. It's very sad. Yeah, before I get mad. All right. So by the time we get to the 700s, Islam gets introduced into Northern Africa. So what do we do then? Well, a lot of people begin to Islamize, convert to Islam. And we're going to see a string of Northern African political groups. Some of these are going to be dominated by Arabs, but some of them are actually going to be run by Berbers. And one of the groups that I can talk about is the Zirid dynasty, or Zirid. And they had quite a bit of northern territory. You can see here. Now, what's interesting is that, and this is a sort of an early picture of the territory that they would have controlled. You can see here that it says on behalf of the Fatimids. So the Fatimids were a group that were ruling over here in Egypt, and as a way to make it easier to handle sort of the larger concept of Ifriqiya, which is what the Muslims refer to this northern part of Africa as, is Ifriqiya. You pick local people that are going to be more in tune with how things are going, and you leave them in charge. So this is how the Zirids are going to end up taking over. But just to be for real, they've got a lot of problems kind of off the bat. Most notably, they are one particular tribe of Berbers, and they don't get along with all of the other tribes of the Berbers. And this is something that's pretty evident as a mistake that the Fatimids didn't recognize. They're like, oh, you're Berber, they're Berber. We'll put one group of Berbers in charge and they'll be able to run everything. But that didn't work because the differences between the Berber tribes were, at some times, including this time, rather significant. And not every Berber wanted to be under the control of the Fatimids or the Zirid dynasty to begin with. And this is when you're going to get a rebellion by a group of people called the Hammadids. And then you're going to have a bit of a civil war. The Hammadids were a different group of Berbers that didn't really like the idea that the Zirids were in charge. So by the time we get to about 1015, they're going to overthrow the control. Well, they're going to say basically that we're not going to answer to the Fatimids anymore. The Hammadids decided that they're going to line back up with the Abbasids. This is a whole big deal that is very convoluted and gets into differences in religious ideology. The Fatimids were largely Shia. The Abbasids were Sunni. The Zirids, who were ruling by the favor of the Fatimids, were Shia. The Hammadids decided to switch to Sunni. This causes a lot of trouble. There's going to be a war that lasts for about 2 years. They're eventually going to gain their independence, and when that happens, the Zirid are going to lose a big old chunk of their territory. The Hammadids are going to end up making their own capital and establishing their own country, and this is going to cause a lot of infighting amongst the Berber tribes. And what's really going to be interesting here is that the group that leads to the ultimate collapse of both of these, the Zirid dynasty and the Hammadids, are the Normans. Because by the time that we are talking about in the late 1000s, early 1100s, the Normans had made their way down into the Mediterranean and had taken over large portions of Italy and Sicily and were interested in fighting to take over parts of Africa. And the Normans are going to invade and basically lead to the collapse of both of these Berber groups. Unfortunately, not a lot of this. I forgot to show you. So here's the Hammadids. You can see how much they took here, which left the Zirid just a little bit of territory. The Zenata here are another group of Berbers. But anyway, you can see here Bani Hammad. This is a new capital city that they had built. And a little bit of that city still exists, including this this tower right here, which was a minaret at one of their mosques. If you get them to fight each other, they're not busy fighting you. Exactly. That is correct. Sounds like a common colonization theme. Come to a place with multiple tribes, give one tribe's preference and power, and then all heck breaks loose. That's a very, very common tactic. And what's interesting here is in some situations, not this particular situation, but in some situations, you pick the weaker of the groups to leave in charge so that they are then dependent on you as a colonizer to maintain their control. Because they are not strong enough to control everything on their own, they have to ask you for help, for supplies, for aid, and that ends up making them reliant on the external power, right? So there's that. Okay. It's both smart and devious. Yeah, it's messy. It's the game of politics, right? You put the weak people in charge, and then they have to ask you for help. All right, if we move a little bit to the west, and we look at a group called the Almoravids. Here's our map here. The Almoravids are an interesting group over here in the westernmost part of Africa. And what's notable is their interest in southerly action. So by the time we get to our Berber kingdom stage around this period, the camel had been introduced to northern Africa, and trans-Saharan trade was going to start kicking up. And the Almoravids particularly were interested in these two cities down here, Aldegost and Gao. These two cities originally were part of the old Ghanaian Empire and were huge trans-Saharan trade outposts. Marrakesh actually gets founded and built by the Almoravids during this time period. They're going to start dominating trans-Saharan trade, and that's going to give them a lot of money. And the Almoravids specifically are going to make a ton off of this trade route stuff. They were established by a group of Berber tribes that allied against the Arabs that were in charge of this region. And as they began to expand, they're going to expand along these trade routes with the specific intent of making the money, right? If you have the money, you can then push. By the 1050s, they had gotten most of the territory conquered. As a way to further solidify their control over the trade in the region, they're going to found Marrakesh. This is in the early 1060s as a new hub of trans-Saharan and also Mediterranean trade, because they're going to start looking northward. And during the period of time that they're in control, the Emirate of Cordoba had begun to fall apart. This is what's going on in Spain. The Christian kingdoms of northern Iberia, Galicia, etc., had begun to retake territory, and the Almoravids are going to see this as an opportunity to expand their influence. So they push into the Iberian Peninsula and take over a lot of the territory that had previously been held by the Emirate of Cordoba. And this is going to give them a multi-continental trade empire. And they're going to make a pretty good go of it. They're going to be really interestingly brought down from the inside. And this is, like, of all of the different stories that could be individual streams, this particular one is really, really interesting, because the Almoravid dynasty is going to fall to another group called the Almohads. And if we look at their territory, this is what they're going to end up holding. And that's a pretty big empire. It's most of what the Almoravids had. Obviously, they lost the trans-Saharan trade, I guess, domination, but, you know, you can't have everything. Nogre has a cold. You're just going to say hi and go back to lurking. Nogre, sorry to hear that, man. Hope that you feel better soon. Just as an aside, I was really stoked that I caught you last week and got to go through the Bhagavad Gita. Dude, that, like, I was on a high for that for a couple of days. It's very, very rare that I get to have the good philosophical discussion about some Eastern stuff, and I was all over that. If you're not already following Nogre, you should, because Nogre is a really smart dude that reads philosophy and discusses this on stream. And I kind of I didn't bend his arm, but I got him to read some Bhagavad Gita, which is excellent. Now that we're doing shoutouts, I guess we should do everybody, right? Go follow K Geek Art, because he's working on a map of the first age of Middle Earth right now, and it's amazing, and it's giving me all kinds of missing out feelings. go follow Lumpy Dragon Potato, who is building a fantasy kingdom called Fanriel. It is also playing Anno 1800. I played a little bit of that this afternoon. I lurked for a little bit, but I was trying to read, and the Anno 1800 is a game that's very involved. Like, you have to pay attention, and I was finding it not conducive to split my attention. So, but it's good content. I just couldn't give it the attention that it deserved. And we got my friend JMR Killer in the chat as well. JMR is a gamer sometimes and spends time in the gaming fort, but has also started doing stuff like Gundam building and Lego building and model building, which everybody knows is near and dear to my heart. So go follow JMR. I did not see your Boldak and Chips haul. The Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and the Tao Te Ching are your favorite text. Excellent, Cryo. That's very cool. I'm reading Bhagavad Gita again. I read it probably, I don't know, almost 20 years ago for the first time. And I've read parts of it here and there, but I felt like I needed to give it another whole go. And I found a really good translation that's got really good notes and has a very, very good description of the material as a preface and the history of it. And I've gotten way, way more out of it this time around than I did the last time that I read it. But that's also, I mean, I'm 20 years older, right? So you bought a dozen potato chip flavors to Xmas Eve and you're in charge of snacks. Nice. I missed that part of the stream, but that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, Chronix, I love Asian stuff. I love Asian philosophy, Asian history, Asian religion. I would love to sit down and read all of the Vedas one day, but just to be for real, that's a lot of work. The Vedas are long as heck. I think the Rig Veda is like 5,000 pages. Oh my gosh. But I mean, it's cool stuff though, right? It's pretty cool stuff. So anyway, Almohads. Who are these people and why are we talking about them? Well, so here's the deal. There was a particular fellow, the Berber, inside of the Almoravids, and his name was Umgar ibn Tumart. And he was very well traveled. He had spent time in places like Baghdad. He had traveled all over the northern African world, had spent time in Marrakesh. And he, along the way, developed some very interesting interpretations of Muslim scripture. And he got really, really deep into it and developed this very, very conservative theology that got him in a lot of trouble. He did not fit very well with the ruling Almoravids. One of the things that he criticized them for being was just too lax. They were not good Muslims. They didn't have the proper dedication to the Islamic teachings. And so they ran him out, right? They basically wouldn't let him in the cities. They said that he was, rabble rousing. They said that his teachings were heretical. And he had some very strict interpretations. Had a lot to do with like the way that the nature of Allah. And anyway, it wasn't compatible or simpatico with the average Muslim experience of the time. So they ran him out of town and he ended up living in a cave. And anytime somebody lives in a cave, that's either going to be a really, really short story or a really interesting story. So he ends up having this following, and he becomes the weird guy in the cave, and develops this sort of fanatical following of people that believe in his interpretation of the Quran. And they convince him that he is actually Allah's chosen leader. And they convince him to declare himself caliph. Now, this is an interesting point. So technically, this is the Almohadi Caliphate. To claim the title caliph, you were supposed to make or be able to make a claim to rule all of Islam. So caliph, if you're going to use the title caliph, you're supposed to claim that you are the ruler of all Islam, because there can only be one caliph, and most of the rulers in northern Africa had never even thought about trying to call themselves caliph. The only person that was even potentially trying to call themselves caliph were the Abbasid leadership all the way back in Baghdad, and they barely had a claim to it as it was. But he decides to call himself caliph, and he's going to sort of have this fanatical army that sort of sprouts out of the desert and follows him out of his cave, and he starts conquering territory. And he is going to be responsible for overthrowing the Almoravid dynasty and setting up the Almohadi Caliphate as the first caliph of this. Is going to conquer northern Africa, southern Iberia. By the time you get to the 1100s, especially the late 1100s, he has set up a ruling dynasty or passed the title to the next caliph, and a lot of the people looking in on this were like, who is this guy? Just find the existing caliph, cut off his head, and take his power. There can be only one. Exactly, right? It's like the quickening. So you end up with this ruling guy who is a caliph, who ends up calling himself a caliph, and it's not going to last very long. The external forces are going to start pushing against the borders, and as soon as that happens, the later caliphs in the line are going to start folding. What's interesting here about all of these sort of quick expansion religious zealot sort of leadership groups is, as long as you're winning, Allah is on your side, right? If you're a crazy person that lives out in a cave and thinks that you have the truest interpretation of the religion, the way that you prove that is to go beat somebody that's way bigger than you. And then when you beat somebody that's way bigger than you, you go, look, it's because God's on my side. And as long as you keep winning, you're correct, right? Obviously, God's on your side. It doesn't matter how strange or different your ideas are. It doesn't matter how far outside of the norm your ideas are. If you're winning, God's on your side. But then if you lose, well, if you lose, maybe God's not on your side anymore. And as the Almohadis are going to start losing, their internal Berber structure is going to fall apart as well. A lot of the tribes that had lined up with them, not necessarily out of sympathy for their religious ideology, but more for the, this is where the money is going to lie kind of ideology, or this is where safety is going to lie ideology, are going to start going, this person's crazy. We should probably not follow them anymore. Reminds me of It's No Good, who always wanted to be caliph in the place of the caliph. Obscure European comic reference. I don't get that one, Cliff. You're welcome to fill me in, but I do not know that one. Or if I do, I'm not putting it together. So anyway, by 1269, the last of the Almohads is going to get killed by one of his own slaves in Marrakesh. And that's going to sort of be like the end of the Almohads. But not too much later after that, you get kind of a string of really bad luck for for a lot of the Berber leadership. So all of these people so far, the the Almoravids, Almohads, these were all Berbers leading other people that were Berber in northern Africa. But by the time we get to the 1300s, this is when things start shifting, and we get a new group that's going to very much clearly not be Berber, and this is the Ottomans. The Ottomans are going to slowly but surely take over all of northern Africa, and they do not get along with the Berbers very much at all. The Ottomans are also not going to get along very well with a lot of the Arabs who had been transplanted into northern Africa. The Ottomans weren't Arab. They weren't Berber. They were Turkish, right? So this is another ethnic group with a different language. They're just not going to sit very well with a lot of this stuff. But they have guns, and when you've got guns and nobody else has guns, you have a big old dominant hand that you can play, right? So for the next 500 years or so, the northern African Berbers are going to rotate in and out of trying to be a little bit more autonomous and Ottoman crackdown, and trying to be a little bit more autonomous and Ottoman crackdown. And they're never really going to be completely able to rule themselves in the way that they would have liked. And just because this sort of tickles my fancy, and because this is sort of something that I talk about even in sociology class, there's a guy in the Ottoman world at this time named Ibn Khaldun. He lived in the late 1300s and very early 1400s. His parents both died in the plague, right? So the Black Death killed both of his parents. He's going to end up working for some of the kind of bureaucratic apparatus of the Ottoman Empire. And he noticed that the Berbers didn't like Islam. Or they didn't like their version of Islam. Specifically, they didn't want to Ottomanize, if you will. And so he decided, I just want to find out why. I'm going to go live with these people. So he actually left and went to go work in these regions in northern Africa and talk with these people and see what's going on. And he wrote one of the, well, in my opinion, and who am I? He wrote what is actually the first sociological treatise on people groups. And he went among the Berber people, and then when he lived in and around them for a couple years, he went back to his sort of home station where he was working in the government, and he wrote this really big book called the Muqaddimah, which is sociology at its finest. It talks about like what holds people together, and it talks about why people groups exist within groups that like each other, and then they don't exist within groups where they don't like each other, and there are social forces that hold people together and push people apart. It comes up with all these great terms. It's a great book. You should go read it. But one of the things that he came up with for this particular situation is the reason the Berbers didn't like the Ottomans is because the Ottomans were trying to make them give up everything that made them Berber. Ottomans didn't like their language. Ottomans didn't like their interpretation of Islam. Ottomans didn't like their culture, their food, their names, that kind of stuff. And wanted them to sort of get in line behind everybody else. And the Berbers were like, man, forget you. This has never been their way. And the Berbers caused a lot of trouble for the Ottomans all the way through to the point where, by the early 1800s, the Ottomans are going to lose control over lots of northern Africa because, well, this is going to be the expansion of European colonization. And so then northern Africa is going to fall under the direction of the French and the Italian and the Spanish. And the Berbers are going to basically trade out one foreign overlord for another set. And they get treated exactly the same way. the Europeans, if anything, are even more harsh towards a lot of the Berber populations because there's a whole other layer of separation, right? The Ottomans at least had Islam to fall back on as a potential unifying factor, but the Europeans aren't friendly with Muslim people. They're overtly Christian. They're going to be looking for plunder instead of cooperative leadership and experiencing mutual benefit. They're just looking for raw materials. So the Berber people of Northern Africa fall under a whole bunch of really harsh French and English and Spanish and Italian domination. And that goes all the way through until, we end up decolonizing in the 1900s. And some of the wars that get fought between European countries and some of these people in Northern Africa are really, really bloody. And in some situations involve the targeted killing of Berber populations because, especially in the regions, again, up into the mountains, the Europeans aren't going to be interested in trying to parlay with a lot of these people. They're just going to blow them up, right? They're going to bomb them. They're going to shoot them with cannons and stuff like that. And they're not really going to be interested in coming to peaceful terms in a lot of situations. So where does that leave us today? Where are the Berbers today? Well, they're in the same places that they were back then. Again, we can kind of go back to, where we're looking at Berber peoples today. And what's notable here, looking at modern populations today, again, there are no countries that are ruled by Berber people. There's not even a country in the world today where Berber people represent a majority of the population. The highest population percentage country is this guy right here, Algeria. Algeria is about 35% Berber, population-wise. But that does not translate into significant political power. They're not in any sort of ruling coalition. They're not really considered, even in a lot of places, equal. There are still a lot of laws in some of these countries, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, even to Tunisia to a certain extent, that have been aimed at trying to basically get Berber people to give up their traditional heritage. The most successful group today when it comes to preserving original, or what we might call original or indigenous culture, is a group of Berbers in Algeria. Again, these are the ones that are promoting the abandonment of the term Berber and the adoption of the term Amazighs to refer to their identity as a people group. But a lot of these places have passed rules where at various times in history it's been illegal to name your children traditional Berber names. In Libya, back under people like Gaddafi, Gaddafi actually was making it illegal for you to teach any sort of Berber language in a school, even in areas where the school would have been predominant. They were making it illegal to write music or do any sort of public display stuff in your native Berber language. Would the blue area be the Tuareg? Yeah. So the group right down here, that's still today very, well, not very, I shouldn't say very, still have a tendency to be things like semi-nomadic or fully nomadic in some situations. Down here in the Sahara, yeah, this is that group. But even Tuareg it's one of those terms that's not as easily applicable as it might seem just on the face, because not all of those people group would fall under that larger umbrella term. So a lot of their customs are looked down on. A lot of their culture is seen as sort of shameful or second rate. So there's a lot of stigma against Berber people today in a lot of these countries. And just in general, there's not a lot of equality in a lot of these places when it comes to people that are going to be from a Berber background. Now, this doesn't mean that everywhere you go, every single Berber is treated badly, but there is a chance that anywhere you go, a Berber is being treated badly. So it's not like all or nothing, but there's a potential everywhere, if that makes any sense. So that's a summary of the Berber people, which is, again, sort of hasty. It throws a lot of stuff together. It doesn't necessarily describe anything in a lot of detail. It's unberberable. Yeah. But they're interesting groups of people. There could have been a lot more that I could have talked about if I had unlimited amounts of time. We didn't really get into stuff like individual cultures or customs. We didn't get into things like native religion or anything like that. So we also, barely skimmed the surface of a lot of these kingdoms. When you were in Tunisia as a kid, we visited Matmata. That was the first time you saw the Berber people. We could talk about the influence of Berber architecture on site. Yeah. So, like, you mean like Tatooine, right? A lot of Tatooine is filmed in Tunisia, and looks a lot like some of the Berber buildings that were built in that area. Yeah, they live like Luke Skywalker, right? Yep. So that's all that I had planned. I usually try to get everything into about an hour and a half, and I managed to get most of that into an hour and a half. But we don't have to run away, right? As always, we can talk, and if anybody wants to ask any questions about this material or just anything in general, or if you want to redeem any channel points, now would be a good time to do so. I've added a couple of things that have been requested as point redemptions. I don't know if Moose is here, but I know that he's been asking me to do Tradle on stream. So I added that, and another one that I like to do called Worldle. But anyway, you don't have to worry about that stuff if you don't want to. One thing that we do need to do before we go away, though, is we need to pick our next viewer request stream. So let me get that up and going real quick. Creator dashboard. We're going to manage a poll. All right. History of the news? How would I even do that? I feel like that would be one of those really tough ones. Okay, so here's what we're doing. We're about to have a poll, and we're going to pick what we're going to cover next. And because Tuna has been quick on the draw, I need 2 more suggestions, and they could be anything from anybody. But this is what do you want to talk about on a viewer request stream, and I'll just take the next 2 that pop up in chat. So we're going to carry over the number 2 from last time. History of board games. Yeah, I probably could do that. History of Arctic exploration. Okay. We could do that. All right. So we've got our questions in, or our things in. I have started the poll. Everybody gets to vote. So if you go to the top of your chat window, you're going to see the poll that is running, and it's current poll. You can click the little down caret window, and you can vote. Everybody can vote. You do not have to be a follower to vote. You do not have to be a subscriber to vote. Anybody that's in the chat can vote. You don't even ever have to have chatted, but you can vote. Top 3 poor history movie adaptations. Kingdom of Heaven is probably number 1. That was so bad. History was so bad in that. Imitation Game might be number 2. The story was good and I liked the movie, but the history was horrible. All the President's Men. I know that people might get a kick out of that one. But everybody can vote. We've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I got 11 votes. A Genghis Khan starring John Wayne. Yeah, that's a pretty bad one. I forgot all about that one. Everybody can vote. Everybody. You don't have to be a constant person. You don't even have to plan on coming back next time. You can vote, though. Who is Henry Kissinger? Former Secretary of State of the United States. Nobel Peace Prize winner and war criminal. He died just a few weeks ago. Now you want a Kingdom of Heaven correction commentary? It would be easier to just show the parts of the movie that were accurate. And that would probably be maybe 20 minutes of it. Also, what's up, Grow Forest? Good to see you, my friend. Hope you're having a good one. Everybody can vote. Everybody can go vote. 11, 13, 12, 13, 14, 15. We are rolling around to the end of the voting era, but everybody can still vote. War criminal sounds almost like it could be a double negative. Is war criminal? According to the Kellogg-Briand Pact, yes. If you don't know what the Kellogg-Briand Pact is. All right, somebody vote quick because I don't want to have to run this thing again as a tie. Somebody vote for one or the other. Quick. Quick. All right. Well, I guess we shall do Henry Kissinger. This will be fun. Good times. That could actually make a good YouTube channel. Historian swears it's green. Yeah. I could probably swear at that quite a bit. All right. So next time we will hit Henry Kissinger and his magic murder bag. And not at all flamey. Well, that's some of the challenge with this stuff is you got to talk about the facts. And I'll have to put my opinion aside, which I can do. I can be an adult. I definitely have opinions, though. The fact that I referred to him as a war criminal is sort of telling. All right? So that's our next viewer request. I am on winter break. I'll be on winter break until January the 2nd. I have to go back really, really early this year. Over a week before students come back. So there's that. Yeah. Anybody else any questions or comments or posts or anything like that? Boo? I don't know why I'm getting booed. Or maybe you're booing me having to go back super early. Maybe that's the case. Who is streaming that we can go and view? Oh, January 2nd gets a boo. Yeah, I agree. It gets a boo. Let's maybe rate somebody new. We haven't rated anybody new in heck a long time. Who's streaming right now? Rated them before. Alright, nope. Let's see if this person's still streaming. They are. Okay, cool. All right, this person is getting blown up by a hype train, so let's go hang out and have fun with them. So this is Astro Canuck. Well, actually, let me get the raid set up. Okay. Oh, I gotta do this. There we go. I'm currently building the Master Grade Zeta Verka. We've got about that much of him built so far. It's a really good build. Having a good time with it. You found a home for your grandparents' piano. Interesting. All right. So we're going to go raid Astro Canuck, who is doing Lego stuff, but yeah. And here's something new. Because I have people that have done cool things. I have made a thank you page. So you can see here the people that are patrons. And you can see here people that have been so cool as to donate books to my world. And if you are so inclined, you can see the commands there. If you would like to participate, you do not have to. You should not. But we're going to go hang out and see Astro Canuck. So our battle cry is adventure. If you get in chat with Astro Canuck, yell adventure. And if you have any of our really cool emotes, you can share those. But thank you to everybody. And you're very welcome, Cliff. And we'll be back around Thursday, probably. Now, there's a chance that I might not be able to make it Thursday. I've got some family stuff going on, and I might have to work all day. But I don't know. We'll see. Plan on Thursday. If not too long after that. But until next time, everybody, take it easy and have a good one.